Greetings to all our viewers from across the nation and the globe. Welcome to the Treasures from the Vault podcast, and I'm your host, DJ Pereira. In this series, we'll be exploring some of the most exclusive artifacts from the special collections here at TCU's Mary Couch Burnett Library. Joining me will be expert archivists and librarians who will give us an intimate exploration into these precious resources. So, why don't you come and join me? Let's have a look at what's inside the vault. Greetings to all our viewers from here and across the globe. I'm your host, DJ Pereira, welcoming you to another insightful episode on the Treasures from the Vault podcast. Joining me today is the senior archivist from the special collections here at TCU's Mary Couch Burnett Library, Allison Kirshner. Allison, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Allison, I understand that you're going to take us back in time to World War II. Please go ahead and introduce what it is that you're going to present to our audience today.
So what we're going to look at today is a journal and several journals written by Smith Green, who was a prisoner of war in Japan during World War II. He was also a survivor of the Bataan Death March. And he was able, during his time as a prisoner of war after the Bataan Death March, he kept journals documenting daily life in the camps, and we have those here.
That is intriguing to get firsthand account of life and, I'm assuming, working conditions as a prisoner of war. How did Special Collections procure this or these invaluable documents?
These journals are part of a larger collection that were donated to us by the stepsons of Smith Green, Jim and Johnny Bobo. And Smith Green was an alum of TCU, so they thought that this was an appropriate place for the collection. Okay,
prisoner of war, prison camps. Can you describe the conditions of these journals?
Sure. So these journals are in very fragile condition. They would have been carried around the camp, probably put in a pocket and pulled out to make notes. And as you can see, they're very small. They're fragile. The binding is loose. Some of the pages are loose. But considering what they made it through, I think they're in pretty good condition.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will concede that it does look tethered, but I cannot wait to see what powerful messages are within these pages. But for now, can you also explain the historical and cultural significance of these writings and the insights it gives us and any collegiate institution into the life of a prisoner of war?
Yeah. So Smith Green came to the Philippines in 1939. He was in the Army. He was a radio man. And he came before the war in the Pacific started. And so that he was just at a defensive outpost in the Philippines. Okay. In 1941, he decided that he wanted to get his officers candidate school training, and so he was approved for that, and his date to leave the Philippines was December 17th, 1941. Now, some people viewing this may know that there's a significant date near that. 10 days earlier is December 7th, 1941, which was the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Now, obviously, Smith Green is not going anywhere. The other thing that people may not realize is that the same day that Pearl Harbor was bombed, the Japanese also bombed the Philippines. General MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur, was in the Philippines at the time, and he sent all of his troops from Manila to the Bataan Peninsula. Unfortunately, because this was a peninsula, it meant that they were kind of cornered. The Japanese moved forward, and they were under siege for 40 days until finally the American and Filipino troops surrendered. After the surrender, the Japanese marched the troops, the Americans and the Filipinos, up north in the Philippines to another camp, about 65 miles over a couple of days, and this is what we know as the Bataan Death March. The conditions were horrific. The men, already hungry from the siege, had barely any food, hardly any water. It was blazing hot. They were walking in the sun. They could be shot at any moment. If they fell down, they could be shot. If they fell down, they could be run over. It was a really, really horrible thing, but Smith Green does manage to survive and make it to Camp O'Donnell. He's then moved to another camp where he survives 2 bouts of malaria and a bout of dysentery. And from that camp, after he's healthy again, they take several hundred of the healthiest and strongest men and put them on a transport boat that is basically a tin can on the water. And they're in there for a month. It's squalid conditions, packed in like cattle. And finally, he makes it to Japan and is put in the Hirohata prisoner of war camp, where he remains for several years. And these journals cover the time period that he is in Hirohata. He was made a honcho, which was the leader of a group of other prisoners. And because of this, he had these journals and was able to keep track of the daily life in the camp. What did they eat for each meal? What were their chores around camp? What jobs were they doing? The Japanese employed them to work at mills and factories. They paid them a tiny, tiny amount, which they were able to use at the company store, essentially, to buy a cigarette or an aspirin. But these journals provide incredible insight into what was going on at the camps during those days.
What I'm curious to know is now Japan, as a member of the Axis powers, was this a privilege that they afforded to all their prisoners, that they could keep some type of diary or journal, or was it something that was just afforded to the honchos? Do we know specifically?
As far as we know, it would have just been the honchos that were able to keep these journals. Okay. And we're really surprised that he was able to keep them over a long period of time. Normally, you would expect that he would have kept these records and then turned it in for the new notebook, but he was able to keep multiple notebooks over time.
Now, Allison, I want to point out, when I was growing up, I studied on the British curriculum, and so when we date our assignments, we usually write the date, the month, and then the year. Now I'm seeing a similar notation here that looks like a date, but the figures just don't resemble that particular order, or even the American notation of dating. Can you explain what we're seeing here with 2622?
Yes, so this was something that I only learned recently when I was presenting these journals to a class, and a student who has studied Japan and Japanese history pointed this out to me. So, because the 6 and the 22 at the end of this, I knew were June 22nd. I had figured that out along the way, but I never knew what the 20 at the beginning was.
Okay.
And the student pointed out to me that the front of the journal says Showa 20, and that this means that it was the 20th year of the Emperor Showa. We know him better as Hirohito, but his name officially was Emperor Showa, and so we don't know why Smith chose to use the Japanese dating of years as opposed to American. But he, for whatever reason, he used 20-6-22, meaning June 22nd in the 20th year of Emperor Showa.
I see. And yes, as I'm glancing at these other journals, I do see the same itemization of that date, and it's, yeah, we've got the Showa and the 20 listed on all of them. Are there other insightful notations that we can get a glimpse of as far as what working conditions were like, how they were treated or mistreated?
Yeah, we have something else that we have in here is a list of Japanese terms for different health conditions. And these would have been Smith Green's way of trying to communicate to their Japanese captors specific conditions that the men that he was over were experiencing. We see throughout his journals that he tried to learn the different Japanese words for things that he came across regularly, just to make communication with their captors easier.
Okay. I see something that catches my eye. OD best one. I get a positive vibe from that entry. Can you give us insight into what that denotes?
Yes, this is a really interesting notation. Almost every day he would note who the officer of the day was, and it would be the Japanese officer of the day. This one on July 3rd was the best one. On July 4th, the officer of the day was school teacher. July 5th, the officer of the day was Marino, so he knew at least part of the man's name.
See.
And then on July 6th, the officer of the day was Specs. And so I imagine he had glasses. And so that he had different nicknames for their different officers.
You know, I need to come back to an earlier inquiry where, okay, when you think of prisoner camps, you're thinking of, as you mentioned, you know, the squalor, it's damp, it's miserable, conditions are harsh, unforgiving. But as I'm analyzing the handwriting, everything is neat. There doesn't seem to be any shorthand. There isn't, actually, and everything is neat and spelt out. This doesn't seem to be a journal of someone under duress. Is there insight you can give us into that? And
it does seem, now I will start this with the caveat that we have the recollections of one man from one camp. You know, we talked about earlier how the men that were taken to this camp were the strongest and the healthiest.
Yes.
We don't know what happened to those that weren't as strong or as healthy. We don't know what their camp was like. It does appear that the Japanese valued this labor force. They needed these men to work in their factories, in their mills, in their shipyards to support the war effort. And it feels different from what you read about what was going on in Europe.
Yes.
And the way the Germans handled their prisoners of war. Their prisoners of war worked, but they didn't feel like a valued workforce. Now, conditions were not great. There were many days where they did not have enough to eat. People were disciplined very harshly for mistakes or for disrespect or for, you know, any number of things. They had lice, they had fleas. So it wasn't an enjoyable experience, but the Japanese did seem to have a motivation to keep them healthy and fed.
you used a poignant term there, valued. The Japanese valued their healthiest and strongest prisoners. From my understanding, the Geneva Conventions of 1949 specifically outlined humanitarian law and how prisoners of war in particular should be treated with dignity. And though those came later, from what I'm seeing here, you know, it seems like they were well fed because Smith Green definitely outlines in detail the recipes and the ingredients and how often they were fed. And I know you just pointed out that this is, we have to be careful not to generalize, that this is the collections of one experience. Are there any entries in there that present the opposite side of what we're seeing here, as far as mistreatment or an emotional breakdown, a vulnerability?
You know, you do not tend to see, at least in what he recorded, breakdowns. Smith Green appeared to be pretty even-keeled. Something interesting that he mentions in his recollections is that this was his perspective. He felt like the people who survived the best in the prisoner of war camps were people who came from a hard life, a life where they were used to working hard. He had worked hard on a farm for many years. He mentions that the farm boys were the ones that were used to working hard, and that made this a little more bearable. Or even the men who came from the inner city and had led a hard life, that they were able to make it through this experience in a little better fashion than maybe some of their other fellow soldiers. Now, again, that was his perspective, but
Understood.
you can see that in the way that he is very matter of fact. He just gives the details. Now, one of my favorite pages to look at in this one is starting on the date of August 14th in 1945. Now, we also have to remember that Japan would be a day ahead of us.
Yes.
And so the 14th there was the 13th here. So it says Kamigumi 49. Kamigumi was the shipyard where his group worked. 49 of the men, or 49 of the men are working there. 39 are in the shipyard and 10 are working on the ship. For breakfast, they have rice, eggplant, and green soup. Then for lunch, they have rice, daikon, and then soup is marked out with the comment, too many air raids for soup. And then he says, ate lunch in camp, went to the mill. Air raid, no work, back to camp at 3. Then for dinner, they had kefir corn, soybeans, spud, and sweet pepper soup. The officer of the day was the best one. He has was underlined.
Yes.
Then we move to August 15th. Kamigumi, 1944, all to the yard. So not 1944, I'm sorry, Kamigumi 44. So 44 men are going to the shipyard. They have rice, spud, and pepper soup. Then they have rice, bean mash, and pepper gizzard soup with few beans. And then dinner is rice, soybeans, spud, onion, and pepper soup. The officer of the day was my friend. Then we have in all caps, war ended at 4:05 p. today. Japan to be disarmed and prisoners safeguarded. He follows that on August 16th with no work today. He gives their 3 meals. There is no officer of the day. It says OD and then blank.
I see.
And then it says the commanding officer said the mill would be resting for a few days, so we would be off for a while. Of course, we know the reason, and he knows we know. Time passes very slowly for us. I spent the day reading, writing, washing clothes, wandering around, talking about when we're leaving, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone knows it's all over, but the excitement is yet to come, I believe. We are still in the same place with the same guards, the same food, and still confined as yet. Everyone asks the others their opinions as to this or that. Some are making plans, remaking plans, changing plans all the time. And then he goes on, they remain in this camp until September 9th. So they almost a month after the war has ended. And we have a really interesting description of what it was like to be a freed prisoner of war that doesn't have anywhere to go yet. So at first, the men just kind of scatter. They're going to the villages, getting drunk. They're laying around. They're enjoying their freedom, essentially. But the commanding officer of the camp, who is the highest ranked officer there, realizes he needs to get them under control. And so they get back back to camp, organized. They still have to do their chores. They still have to, get up at certain times, go to bed at certain times, just to keep them from going too crazy until they're able to get enough trains to the camp to return the men home.
So instead of dispersing forever back to the Allies, they still stay together. They still organize themselves, stay true to their curfews, and even kept themselves occupied with their daily prison chores, so to speak. I find it amusing that the day before, the OD officer was described as a monster, and then just before the Japanese surrendered, he had made, as according to that, a best friend in one of the,
Yeah, because they would rotate through. So, there were, as you read through these, you see that there's several that he doesn't like, several that he refers to multiple times. And so it is interesting that he definitely had a relationship of some sort with these officers to have an opinion about them.
So from an academic standpoint, Allison, how can students and faculty benefit from interacting with these journals?
Yeah, one of the, most important things is these are primary resources. These show what it was like to be in a prisoner of war camp from the human perspective, and the ability to hear emotion and things like that are things that you won't hear in just a textbook in your history class. You can also evaluate it for bias or perspective. Like we talked about, this is the perspective of this man from this camp. But you can also cross references because there are other sources out there from other camps, and you can talk about how was his experience the same or different. We also have in one of our other collections, the Amon Carter collection, a prisoner of war record from Amon Carter Jr., who was a prisoner of war in Europe. And so we have the ability to compare what it was like to be a prisoner of war under the Germans as opposed to what it was like to be a prisoner of war under the Japanese. The other thing, you mentioned the Geneva Conventions. We can kind of see how some of these experiences in different prisoner of war camps around the world led to new rules of war.
Yes.
These are the ways that we as the world are going to agree that we will treat prisoners in moral and ethical ways.
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, though the Geneva Conventions were ratified after the fact, we can't necessarily say that their rights were violated, but then again, it does give us an insight as to how different members of the Axis powers dealt with their prisoners of war. You mentioned earlier that these journals are in a fragile state, so as a second part to my question, how would students and faculty be allowed to physically interact with these?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we have to do as archivists is to preserve the materials. And our priority is that these materials are here for researchers to use for the long term. If somebody wants to see these journals in person, we're happy to bring them out under supervision of an archivist. But we've also digitized them so that if someone on the other side of the world wanted to look at them, they could. But also it minimizes handling. It minimizes the tears in paper or the binding falling apart or the oils from our hands. And so we can provide a digital version of the book. Now you can see, it's important to see the books, the journals in their context. These are tiny journals, which if you just look at the digital version, you have no concept of how big they actually are. The journals are tiny and the handwriting is tiny. And it's also important to see them in the context of the larger collection and see what other supporting documents go with these journals. And so we definitely encourage people to view the physical items. Come visit, make an appointment. We're happy to have that, but we do provide ways for people to view it in a way that protects the materials as well.
So you mentioned the natural oils. As the senior archivist, can you confirm or debunk the myth that one should always wear fashionable gloves when handling such precious items?
Yeah, you know, it's something that you see on TV often, is
Yes.
people wearing gloves. It looks better. But you can even tell when I've been flipping these pages, it's difficult to get a handle on the page, to turn it gently, and if you have gloves on, you can't feel the page as well, and so it's really easy to tear things or to not be able to turn the pages, and not having gloves on helps us to handle these materials in a way that continues to protect them, even though that's not what everybody first thinks. Everybody first thinks we should have gloves on. We just try to only touch the edges of the pages and touch them as rarely as possible.
And I want to just finally touch upon you and your passion for special collections, and as an archivist, what drove you to the profession, and what does it take to reach the level of senior archivist?
I have always loved history. I grew up in a family that history was part of every family vacation, and so I've always loved history. I have my undergraduate degree is in history, and then I got a master's in library science. And then further, after that, I was able to get an archival certification, and that was just further education specific to archives. I love the ability to hold in my hands an item that was in a prisoner of war camp in Japan 80 years ago. You know, to having these materials, you know, these are witnesses to events in history, and holding it and reading this handwriting of this man who lived in this time. These things happened, they were real. And so I just love the ability to make history alive by studying these items, but also by preserving them. And that is the main goal of an archivist. An archivist is here to make sure that materials are preserved for those who would like to use them to interpret them. We are not the interpreters of materials, we are the preservers, and making them accessible to those historians who want to take the materials that they find and then interpret from there. Not coming in with preconceived plans of the story they'll tell, but coming in using our materials and putting the pieces together.
Wonderful. And finally, how does one go about trying to visit the special collections here at TCU?
There is on our website, which we will provide a link for, a contact form where people can contact us to make an appointment. We are open Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. And we are happy to have researchers during that time. They can also, on our website, find a number of resources for searching our materials to see what we have.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it, and hopefully you'll execute it. Make an appointment, come visit the special collections, come visit Allison and her team, and avail yourselves of these journals that do give us, as Allison mentioned, a primary first-hand account into history. Allison, thank you so much for sharing your passion and your expertise.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.